Have you ever sat there, maybe in your kitchen with a cup of coffee, and just thought, why do I always have to be the one to reach out? Maybe it's been a week since you've heard from your kids, maybe longer. You sent a message, no reply. You called, no answer. And after a while, something inside you just stops. You stop texting, you stop calling, you stop trying. Not because you're angry, not because you've given up, but because you're tired. You want to know if the connection is really two-sided, or if it's just you holding the whole thing together. If this feels familiar, you're not alone. So many people over 60, people like you who've raised children, poured your heart into your family, and sacrificed more than anyone really knows, now find themselves wondering, where did we go wrong? Or, did we even go wrong at all? Today we're talking about something that's as real as it gets. What happens when you stop talking to your kids? And not in a dramatic, cut off all ties kind of way. No, I'm talking about the quiet kind. The kind where you just stop showing up first. Stop being the one to always ask how they're doing. Stop being the one who keeps the family group chat alive. And here's the thing. When you do that, something happens. Your kids react. Some in ways you expect. Some in ways that catch you completely off guard. And those reactions, they say a lot more than words ever could. Now, before we go any further, I want you to know, this isn't about placing blame. This isn't about pointing fingers or stirring up guilt. This is about understanding, about seeing things clearly. Because sometimes the clearest answers come when we finally stop speaking and just watch what happens in the silence. Let me ask you this. Have you ever stopped calling your daughter and then a few days later, suddenly she's liking your Facebook photos again? Or maybe your son starts commenting on that old family picture you posted 2 weeks ago? It might seem small, but it's not. That's the first reaction many parents see, the little tests. You stop talking and suddenly they toss out these little signals. A text that says, "Hey, how are you?" out of the blue. A comment like, "I saw this and thought of you." It seems casual, even random. But what they're really doing is checking the water. Testing to see if you're still there, still listening, still watching. And you know what? That's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean they're manipulative or uncaring. It means, on some level, they noticed your absence. They felt it. They may not admit it. But your silence made an impact. Because here's a truth that's hard to hear. Sometimes your presence becomes so dependable that your absence is the only thing that gets noticed. And the moment you step back, your kids may realize, wait, Mom hasn't called in a while. Dad usually checks in by now. Why is it so quiet? And rather than come out and say, I miss you, or I've been thinking about you, they throw a line out to see if you'll bite. A small gesture, a question, a memory. But then again, not all reactions come wrapped in warmth. Sometimes you get something entirely different. You stop reaching out, and your kids, they act like they couldn't care less. You check their social media and it's like nothing ever happened. Photos at brunch with friends, vacation pictures, smiling selfies. No mention of you. No call, no message, just life. Going on without you. That stings. I know. It feels like you meant nothing, like your silence didn't even register. But let me tell you something important. It's not always what it looks like. You see, acting unbothered doesn't mean being unbothered. We've all done it. We've all tried to put on a brave face. Maybe after a tough phone call, we go out for a walk and try to look fine. Maybe after an argument, we laugh a little louder than usual. Because it's easier to look okay than to admit we're hurting. Your kids might be doing that too. They might be feeling your absence, but not know how to deal with it. They've never seen you not show up before. And now that you're quiet, they don't know what to say, so they pretend it doesn't matter. They post, they party, they carry on. But late at night, when no one's watching, your name still comes to mind. Now, not every reaction is gentle. Some come with heat, frustration, even anger. You might hear things like, "Why are you ignoring me?" Or, "You've been distant lately. What's going on with you?" And it's tempting to get defensive, to say, "You're the one who never calls me back." But take a breath, because behind that sharp tone is something raw. Fear. Fear that they've lost you. Fear that the roles are changing. That the parent they've leaned on is starting to lean away. And that scares them more than they're willing to admit. You see, your kids have gotten used to you being the anchor. You're the one who remembers birthdays, who calls after the doctor's appointment, who reminds them to rest. You've been the constant. But when that constancy wavers, even a little, it shakes their world. They don't always know how to process that shift. So instead of saying, "I miss you," they lash out. They accuse, they deflect. But it's not because they don't love you. It's because they don't know how to handle the change. And that's where your strength comes in. Not in reacting the same way, but in standing steady. In knowing that your silence isn't a punishment. It's a pause, a moment to step back and see what they do with the space. Because that space tells you everything. Sometimes it pulls them closer. Sometimes it makes them reflect. Sometimes it creates a healthy reset where the relationship can begin to grow in a new, more balanced way. And yes, sometimes it reveals a painful truth that maybe the relationship needs healing, or boundaries, or even a bit of distance to find clarity again. Whatever the case, your choice to stop talking isn't about giving up. It's about listening to what happens when the noise fades. And in that quiet, you'll start to hear something you may have missed before. Their true feelings, their patterns, and even your own needs that have gone unmet for far too long. So here's what I want you to remember. You're not alone in feeling this way. You're not the only parent who wonders what happened to the closeness you once had. And you're not selfish for wanting your kids to show up for you. The way you've always shown up for them, you've spent a lifetime giving. Now it's okay to take a moment and see who gives back. And as we continue this conversation, I want to explore with you some of the deeper shifts that can happen when you pull back. Because some of them will surprise you. Some might hurt. But some might give you exactly the peace you've been craving. So take a breath. You're doing just fine. Let's keep going. And here's something that might catch you off guard. When you stop reaching out, some of your kids won't just test the waters or pretend everything's fine. Some will start replacing you. Not in the literal sense, of course, but they might begin filling that emotional space you used to hold with someone else. A friend, a partner, a coworker, maybe even another family member. You'll notice little things. They'll call their aunt more often. They'll go on about a neighbor who really listens. You'll hear about how their friend helped them when they were sick, or how their spouse planned a birthday dinner, or how someone at work gave them great advice. And part of you might feel replaced, like you've been pushed out, forgotten. But I want to offer a different way to look at this, one that brings peace instead of pain. Sometimes when we step back, we give our kids the space to grow. And yes, that growth can mean turning to others for support. But it doesn't mean you're less important. It just means they're learning to stand on their own, or lean on someone else once in a while. And isn't that part of what you wanted all along? You raised them to be strong, to be independent, to handle life without always needing you to catch them. And now they're doing just that. It's just that sometimes independence feels a lot like distance. So when you see them sharing their stories with others, try not to jump to the thought that you're being pushed out. Instead, take it as a sign that your job might be evolving. You're not the one holding the safety net anymore. You're the one who taught them how to build their own. Still, I know it doesn't always feel that way. Sometimes it feels like silence turned into separation. And when that happens, there's a deeper question that comes up. Do I matter to them the way they still matter to me? That's the question. That keeps you up some nights. The one you don't say out loud, even to your closest friends. And it's in that quiet space, when the calls have stopped and the texts go unanswered, that the most important reaction can happen, not from your kids, but within yourself. Because here's what we rarely talk about. When you stop talking to your kids, it doesn't just shift the relationship, it shifts you. It makes you look inward. It brings up memories, regrets, doubts. But it can also bring clarity, peace, and even healing. Sometimes in that pause, your kids begin to reflect too. They start remembering the little things. How you always showed up even when they didn't. How you sent birthday cards without fail. How you picked up the phone when no one else did. How your voice was the one they could always count on. At first, they might not admit it. They might not even realize what's happening. But your silence creates a ripple. It lingers longer than you think. And then one day, it happens. A message arrives. Maybe not with an apology, but with a softness you haven't felt in a while. A gentle question, a check-in, maybe even an invitation to talk. It won't erase the gap, but it might bridge it. And when it does, the conversation feels different, less rushed, more thoughtful. There's a sense that they're not just going through the motions anymore. They're present. They're aware. Because your absence taught them something your words never could. What life feels like without your voice in it. But even if that message doesn't come, or doesn't come soon, I want you to hold on to something powerful. Your silence was not a failure. It wasn't passive-aggressive, it wasn't cold, it was strong, it was honest, it was necessary. Because love isn't just about giving endlessly. It's also about knowing when to rest, when to protect your heart, when to let others come to you. Not out of guilt, but out of love. And let's be real for a moment. Your heart has been through a lot. You've stayed up late worrying about them. You've watched them struggle and felt helpless. You've given advice they didn't take. You've offered help they didn't accept. And through it all, you've kept showing up. So if now, in this season of your life, you're choosing to step back, to let them show you who they are without your constant presence, that's not wrong. That's wise. It's not about punishment. It's about balance. And if they love you, and most kids do, even if they're terrible at showing it, they'll find their way back. Maybe slowly, maybe awkwardly, but they'll feel the space you left. And one day, they'll want to fill it again. Not because they have to, but because they choose to. And you'll know that. You never stopped loving them. You just stopped chasing them. There's dignity in that. There's peace. So the next time you sit there, wondering whether to send that message or make that call, pause, listen to your own needs, ask yourself, am I reaching out because I miss them or because I feel obligated? Am I calling because I want to or because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? Those questions matter, because when you move from obligation to intention, everything shifts. You start speaking from a place of strength, not fear. You engage because you want to connect, not because you're terrified of drifting apart. And that changes the dynamic more than any silent treatment ever could. It reminds your kids that your love isn't something they can take for granted. It's something they need to nourish too. That relationships aren't one-way streets. They're bridges, and bridges only hold if both sides are strong. Now let's talk about something I know you've probably thought but never said out loud. You might be wondering, what if they never come back? What if I stop reaching out and they just let me go? That's the scariest question of all. But it's also the most revealing. Because if your child is willing to let you fade away without so much as a phone call, that doesn't say something about your worth. It says something about where they are in their journey. And sometimes the hardest truth to accept is this: some people need to lose the sound of your voice to understand the value of your presence. That's not your burden to carry. That's theirs. Your role now isn't to chase. It's to live, fully, joyfully, and with the kind of inner peace that comes from knowing you've given your love freely, and that's more than enough. And if they return, wonderful. You welcome them with grace, not guilt, with love, not resentment. And if they don't, you keep living anyway. You build new moments. You nurture friendships. You explore passions you never had time for. You discover, maybe for the first time in decades, what it means to live for yourself again. You've spent so long taking care of others. Now it's your turn, so go ahead. Make that walk in the morning, just because it feels good. Bake that pie not for a family gathering, but for the sheer joy of it. Laugh loudly. Sleep in. Travel. Start a garden. Join a class. Write letters. Sing. Dance. Dream. Because you are not just a parent. You are a whole person. And your story matters, even if some chapters include quiet pages. And sometimes, in the stillness, the most beautiful parts of life finally have room to bloom. And sometimes, what grows in that space is something unexpected. Not just in your kids, but in you. A new sense of strength, a new kind of peace, even a new way of understanding what love really looks like at this stage of life. You see, after years of giving and sacrificing and making sure everyone else is okay, it's easy to lose touch with what you need. And when you finally stop talking, when you pause long enough to stop pouring out, you begin to hear your own heart speak again. Maybe it tells you it's time to rest. Maybe it nudges you to find a new circle of friends. Maybe it whispers that you're allowed to let go of the guilt you've carried for decades. Guilt about not being a perfect parent. About that one conversation you wish you'd handled differently. About all the moments you tried your best and still felt like it wasn't enough. But here's the truth. None of us get it all right. Every parent, no matter how loving, stumbles. What matters most isn't perfection. It's presence. And if you showed up more times than not, if you loved with all you had, if you kept trying even when it was hard, then you've done more than enough. Let that be enough. And now, let's return to your kids. Because sometimes, when you stop reaching out, something shifts in them that leads to the most beautiful reaction of all, reflection. They start to sit with your absence. They notice the silence more than they expected. They realize that for all their busyness, something is missing, a steady hand, a gentle voice. The quiet but unwavering love that only a parent like you could give. And slowly, that realization turns into something else. Humility, awareness, growth. They might not call with grand speeches. They might not say all the things you've been longing to hear, but you'll notice a change. Maybe they ask how you're doing, and actually wait for the answer. Maybe they remember your birthday without a reminder. Maybe they stop talking only about themselves and ask about you. Your health, your hobbies, your life. That's when you know the silence worked. Not as punishment, but as a mirror. And if you're lucky, it turns into something more. A renewed connection, a deeper respect, a new phase of the relationship. One where you're not just the parent who gives, but also the person who is valued, seen, and appreciated. But even if it doesn't come to that, if your silence is met with distance or confusion or even anger, I want you to hold on to this. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to miss them. It's okay to love them deeply, even from afar. Your love doesn't stop just because the phone stopped ringing. But your peace doesn't have to stop either. You can hold both. You can love and still choose space. You can miss them and still honor yourself. Because at this stage in life, your well-being matters just as much as anyone else's. So if you find yourself tempted to reach out again and again just to keep the connection alive, pause. Ask yourself, am I doing this out of love or out of fear? Because love gives space to breathe. Fear clings. Love invites. Fear demands. And when you let go of the fear, when you trust that the bond you've built is strong enough to survive a little silence, that's when real love has room to grow. So let this be your reminder. You don't have to chase anyone to keep your value. You are already valuable. Your presence, your experience, your wisdom, your story, it all matters. And if your kids can't see that right now, it doesn't mean you've failed. It just means they're still learning, still becoming, still figuring out how to love in the way they were loved. So what can you do in the meantime? Keep showing up for yourself. Take care of your health. Stay curious. Connect with friends. Build a routine that fills your days with meaning. Let go of resentment. Forgive when you're ready. Not because they asked, but because you deserve peace. And if your child calls tomorrow or next month or next year, you'll be ready. Not waiting in bitterness, but rooted in love. Whole, strong, steady. And if they don't call, you'll still be okay. Because you've learned something powerful. That your peace doesn't depend on anyone else's behavior. It begins with your own choices. So here's my gentle nudge to you. Don't let silence scare you. Let it teach you. Let it reveal. Let it heal. And most of all, don't let it shrink your heart. Because you have so much left to give. Not just to your children, but to the world. To yourself. To the people who are still listening. Still showing up. Still grateful for your presence. If today's message spoke to something in your heart, if it made you think of your daughter or your son, or maybe a grandchild you haven't heard from in a while, just know this: you are not alone. There's a whole community of parents and grandparents walking this same path. Quietly, bravely, learning how to hold love in open hands instead of clenched fists. And if you'd like to share your story, I invite you to do that in the comments. You never know who you might encourage just by speaking your truth. And if this message gave you clarity or comfort today, please take a second to like the video. It helps others find this message too. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to our channel, Strong Elderly Life, where we talk about everything from relationships to emotional well-being to living your best life after 60. Because this chapter of your life, it matters. You matter. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. Your value is not measured by how often your phone rings or how many messages you get. It's measured by the love you've given, the lives you've touched, and the grace with which you carry your story. So hold your head high, speak kindly to yourself, and remember, your silence isn't the end of the story. It might just be the beginning of something better. Here's to living your best life at any age.